So you just got yourself a brand new X-E4 and you need help setting it up, or you're still unsure if this is the right camera for you and you need some inspiration on how to customize this camera, then this video is for you. Let's skip the intro because this video is probably going to be super long anyway. So hi, my name is Samuel, welcome back to my channel. I'm a photographer and filmmaker here in Hamburg, Germany, and I've used the X-E4 for like 2 or 3 weeks now, and I think I'm ready to share my settings and show you how I customized the X-E4. I'm also going to talk about the limitations and the workarounds I found that might make you reconsider the X-E4. The first section of this video will be a little beginner's guide where I show you how to operate this camera. If you are already familiar with Fujifilm cameras, you can skip right to this section where I show you how I set up and customize my X-E4. A little disclaimer here, I'm not going to explain every individual setting, that's what the manual is for. What I will give you are very basic suggestions and recommendations that are based on my own use case and personal preference. Okay, now let's look at the body design. So I have the silver version here, which I think looks very nice and sexy, but some people prefer the black version. Whatever you choose, it makes no difference to your photography or videos, so just choose whatever you like best. So on the front of the camera, it's very flat and there aren't really many buttons. We have the lens mount here, and then we have a dial on the front, which you can use to change aperture, shutter speed or ISO. On the top we have the shutter dial where you can change the shutter speed, the on and off switch, which is also the shutter button. And then we have another small dial, which is the exposure compensation dial. And this is what you can use to correct the auto exposure. So if you're shooting in auto shutter speed, for example, and you find the scene to be too dark on your screen, you can use the compensation dial to dial in more light or less light. You're basically telling your camera to expose brighter or darker depending on what's best for the scene. And we have 2 little tiny buttons on the top. One has no information at all, but this is on default, it's the ISO button. So if you press that, you can change the ISO value. But it is also a function button. Now function buttons are customizable buttons. The same goes for the little Q button, which on default brings up this little quick menu where you can change settings using the joystick. But it is also a function button, so you can customize that as well. On the back of the camera we have on the top left corner the electronical viewfinder, and next to it we have a diopter correction wheel. So if you're wearing glasses you can correct for your eyesight, for example. The problem is I easily bump into this wheel when I have my camera around my neck or in my back. So I taped it over so I don't accidentally change it. Next to the viewfinder we have the drive and delete button. The drive button lets you choose between different shooting modes like burst mode or continuous mode, bracketing, multiple exposure. There are also some fun little filters that no one really needs, but they are there for you to enjoy. And this is also where you select movie mode. Next to it we have the playback button, which allows you to preview your photos you took. And then we have the auto exposure lock and auto focus lock button. On default, this becomes an autofocus button if you are in manual focus, for example. On the right hand side, we have this little joystick, which you can use to select focus points, for example. And it is also your main navigation tool. So inside the menu, you use the joystick to navigate. Down below is the menu or OK button. This is your confirmation button, but also the button to go into the menu. And lastly, on the bottom, we have the display and back button. And the display button shows you additional information on your screen, or you can completely turn off the interface to just see what the camera is seeing. On the left side of the camera, we have a microphone jack. We have a USB-C connection and an HDMI. I think it's a micro HDMI. You can use that to connect your camera to your TV, for example, if you want to share photos on the big screen. And you can also charge the camera via a USB-C cable. On the bottom of the X-E4 we have the tripod mount, and next to it is the battery door. Ouch, that hurt. This is where the battery is inside, and you can also put your SD card in here. I just realized we totally forgot to talk about the LCD screen. So the screen is not fixed, so you can actually tilt it up. It can also tilt down. And if you want to see yourself taking selfies, for example, you can also flip it up. And that is very useful for, let's say, vlogging, or if you want to take a group photo of your family and you also want to be in it, and just to check if you are in the frame, this is good for that. Fujifilm also made some additional accessories for the X-E4, and one is this grip here that you can use, and you can attach it on the tripod mount, and that can be useful if you use longer lenses to get a better grip. But personally, I really like to have this thumb rest on the hot shoe mount, and this makes a huge difference on how your camera feels. Your thumb can rest here, and yeah, it doesn't feel like you are going to drop the camera easily. Let's talk about the operation of the X-E4. Now, if this is your first Fujifilm camera, then don't look at the other Fujifilm cameras, because on this camera, Fujifilm stripped down some of the features that many Fujifilm users very love to use. For example, the AF switch is gone, but if you don't know what you're missing, you're probably okay with it. So most Fujifilm lenses have an aperture ring where you can change the aperture. You have a shutter speed dial. And some other Fujifilm cameras also have an ISO dial. On the X-E4 you need to change the ISO using this button here. Other cameras often have a mode dial where you can switch between manual mode and shutter priority or aperture priority, but you won't find that on Fujifilm cameras because you can just go to the A position of, for example, your aperture ring, and now your camera is selecting the aperture for you. The same goes for the shutter speed. You can go to A position, and if you're now setting your ISO to auto, then your whole camera is doing everything for you. So you're basically shooting in the green mode, the auto mode. Another benefit for having these dials is that whenever your camera is turned off, you can still change the settings. And then when you turn the camera on, you immediately have the right settings you want. Focusing is another big part of any digital camera. On the X-E4 you can just use the shutter button and half press it to use autofocus, and then press it fully to release the shutter to take a photo. And then under AF mode you can switch between single point or zone or wide tracking and all. Single point basically is just the little focus point in the middle, but you can also change the focus point. Zone means you select a little zone, and everything that's in the zone the camera will latch onto. And then you have wide and tracking for, things that are moving. And then you can also set it to all, and then the camera will choose for you what's best for the situation. You even get 6 different AFC custom settings. One is multi-purpose, and then we have ignore obstacles for accelerating or decelerating subjects, for suddenly appearing subjects. What I would recommend to you is that you play with these settings if you need them and find what's best for you. Personally, I only use the single point AF, and what I do is I focus on whatever I want in the middle of the frame, and then I hold my shutter button half pressed and then recompose, and then take the photo whenever I'm happy with the composition. And then there's also manual focusing, where you can use the focus ring on your lens to focus. And to help you focus better, you can activate focus peaking, for example, and then you will see an outline on subjects. And it's really easy to focus with focus peaking. You can also zoom in to check focus. So there are many options, and just find out what's best for you. And also, if you are in manual focusing mode, you can still use the AEL or AFL button to engage the autofocus. Like all modern digital cameras, the X-E4 can shoot in RAW and JPEG format. A RAW file basically gives you the raw output of the camera's sensor, and when you shoot JPEG, the camera is processing the photo for you. And you can apply, for example, some of the film simulations Fujifilm is offering. And they're really nice because they give you a very nice look already, and you can also customize them and basically create your own personal look. And then it's going to be baked into the JPEG file. JPEG files are also easier to handle because the file size is smaller and you can share them straight away on social media. But RAW files are a little bigger and they require special software like Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom or Capture One. And also, if you shoot RAW, you can create looks that your camera can create because you have more flexibility in Lightroom or Photoshop. And there are some presets out there that can, create a look from other cameras that you can't get on this camera. For example, Fujifilm. Oh, shameless plug. Oh, sorry, I don't know what that was, but link is down in the description. Yeah, so choose whatever you want, but if you want to be on the safe side, choose RAW plus JPEG. And if you're happy with the look you created, you can go under Edit, Save Custom Settings and select one of the C slots, and then you can create multiple looks that you can access via the Q button, where you can switch between the different custom modes. There are so many settings inside this camera, so I encourage you to just go through them and try them out to see what they are doing. But I want to show you how to use user settings and how to create a custom menu page. For example, if you go into the menu, all the way on the bottom you have My Menu. On default this is empty, but you can fill this up with settings that you frequently use or you need to change a lot. And you can set it up by going to the wrench icon under Setup and then go to User Settings. And then down we have My Menu settings for stills. And if you go to the right, you can add items from the menu, and everything that is highlighted blue is a setting that you can copy into your My Menu. And what's really neat about My Menu is that every time you press the menu button, it goes straight into your My Menu. And that gives you quick access to all the settings you frequently need to change. And the last thing I think you should know is how to customize your FN buttons. And we do that by going into the menu, go to button dial setting, and then here we go to function FN setting. And here you can see all the customizable buttons, and also the touch screen has some customizable swipe gestures that you can set up, because there are only 3 physical buttons you can customize. So it's good that you can assign some swiping gestures. For example, if I swipe from the left to the right, I get my white balance. Okay, so I hope I was able to give you a little kickstart into helping you understand the X-E4 better. And I know this wasn't super comprehensive, but I really wanted to do this for people who never used the Fujifilm camera before. And I'm now going to show you how I personally set up my X-E4 and how I customized it. And I'm also going to share some of the workarounds and solutions I found for the lack of the AF switch, for example. So I have specific things that I always do whenever I set up a new camera, and I talked about them in detail in one of my beginner guides and setting videos I did in the past for the GR3 and the X100F, but here's a little summary for the X-E4. So number 1 is getting rid of all the clutter, and I'm talking about the display and the viewfinder. There's always so much information that I don't really need to see. So the first thing I do is go under the wrench icon and go to Screen Setup. And then down on page 3 you find Display Custom Setting. And then as you can see, I only have checked focus frame, aperture speed ISO, frames remaining, and mic level and battery level and framing outline. And this is how I like to use my LCD screen and EVF. It has all the important information I need to see. And framing outline, by the way, gives you this tiny thin white outline, which is very useful if you shoot something that's very dark, because the LCD screen has black bezels, and if you're photographing something that is very dark and it's in the corner of the frame, you sometimes can't really see where your frame is ending. And I just like how it looks. Number 2, I get rid of all unnecessary sound effects. I don't want anyone to hear that I'm operating a camera, because it can potentially bruise a scene, especially when I do street photography. I'm focusing on candid moments, and when someone hears my camera going like beep, 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 then they will potentially see me using the camera, and then the moment will not be candid anymore. So in the menu under Sound Setup, I turn everything off. Number 3, I don't want any unnecessary light coming out of my camera, so I go into the menu and disable the AF illuminator. So the AF illuminator is a little light that comes from exactly here that flashes to help the camera focus better in low light. But because you don't always know when it's activating the light, it can again potentially blind someone, or no, that's extreme, but it can make them aware, or someone aware, that you're taking a photo. And because we are like little sneaky, creepy street shooters, no, you don't be creepy on the street. But you know what I mean, right? You don't want people to find out because maybe you want to capture something unstaged. And that also applies to taking pictures of your family members, because who wants a photo like this, or like this? You want something that is unstaged, or I think it looks better that way. Number 4, setting up the fundamentals. And what I mean by that is how I operate the camera in terms of shutter speed, aperture and ISO, because I need to know how to quickly change them. Now on the X-E4 there's no dedicated ISO dial, so I have set up my touchscreen to bring up the ISO settings when I swipe up. Because for me this is the most intuitive gesture I can do on the touchscreen. But I'm usually on auto ISO anyways, but it's just nice to quickly access my main fundamental settings. So that is basically what I first did when I got the X-E4. Now let's go to the most frustrating thing about the X-E4, and that is the lack of any AF switch. And I totally agree with most people who got really frustrated when they heard the news, and me included, because I use the AF switch on my X-H1 a lot. And I remember using it a lot on my X100F as well, because sometimes you don't want to use autofocus because you want to stay on a subject and then you switch quickly to manual focus so that you can, wait for the right moment and have people entering your frame and not ruining your focus, right? And also sometimes I like to use back button focusing. So I think I found a workaround and solution that works for me, and it took me a while to adjust and get used to it, but I think it's the best solution for the X-E4 yet. If you have any better idea, let me know in the comment section. So what I basically did is I went into the menu under AF MF setting and then went down to AF plus MF, turn that on, and then go to MF assist and turn focus peaking highlight on to white high. Now whenever I use autofocus using the shutter button and I keep my finger half pressed, I can override my AF by using the focus ring, and then it will also activate focus peaking. And that is actually super useful because sometimes the AF doesn't know where you want to focus on, especially when you shoot through window or glass. So what you can do now is to use AF first and then override it by using the focus ring. And here's what I do to keep my focus and continue shooting. Because what you normally do when you use the shutter button for AF, whenever you release the shutter and let the finger go, you always have to refocus, right? So let's say you have a nice scene you want to photograph and there's, your subject is in the middle, maybe like 5 meters away. And then you have people constantly running into your frame. But maybe you want to add another layer, so you want that. But the problem is now when you use single AF using the shutter button, every time you release the shutter button, you have to refocus again, right? So the camera might accidentally focus on some of the people in the foreground. So that's where you usually use manual focus or back button focusing, because you can use the back button to focus on your subject, and then whenever you use the shutter button, it won't focus again. But that only worked when you are in manual focusing mode. Now I'm not in manual focusing mode, I'm in single AF mode. But because I enable the camera to override AF, what I can do now is half press my shutter to activate the AF. And it doesn't matter where the AF is focusing because I can, override the focusing. And then I check if I'm on focus on my subject. And now in order for me to keep the focus, and this is a technique that I actually learned from Lucas Palka. Shout out to iExplore, check out that channel. And the technique is that you're basically not lifting your finger up, you're constantly half pressing your shutter. So I'm still focused and I can use manual focusing and focus peaking. And then when I take a photo, I keep my finger half pressed. I don't release it fully. So I can still continue shooting and I'm still locked. And while I'm shooting, I can correct focus by using the focus ring. See, it's very fast, and now I'm focused on my camera, I'm focused on the distance, focused on my camera, and I can keep shooting, and it doesn't matter what's going on in my foreground because I'm not lifting up my finger. But if I do that and I half press again, I activate the AF again. But what if you want to adapt a manual lens to your X-E4? You still have to go into manual focusing manually to activate focus peaking, because the way we set it up now is that you need to activate AF first to override it to get focus peaking. So let's say I want to adapt a Leica lens on the X-E4, which you can do. So now I adapted a Leica lens, and this is a fully manual lens. It doesn't communicate with the camera. So when I turn the focusing ring, there's no focus peaking going on. So how can I still use a manual lens without going into manual focusing mode? And my solution for that is that I assigned this function button to be my focus check. And whenever I press on this tiny button now, it zooms in so I can focus easily. And then once I press it again, I go out and then I can take a photo. It's different than using focus peaking, but actually this is even more accurate because you can really see if you're in focus or not. And this reminds me a lot of the Leica SL I used to own. Whenever I adapted M lenses onto the SL, focus peaking was so bad on that camera that I always had to zoom in anyways. And it helps to use the EVF because it's much easier to see if you're in focus or not. And to me, this is actually a good solution because now I can adapt an AF lens again and then still have single AF and I can override AF whenever I want. But for the times where I still need to switch focus modes, I actually assigned my Q button to bring up focus mode. And then I can switch between AFS, AFC and MF. And because AFS is down on the bottom, I only need to go down with the joystick to go up straight to manual focusing. So for me, it's very easy to switch between manual focus and single focus. I think this is the best solution for the X-E4, but I'm open for suggestions. If you found a better solution, let me know. But so far, I actually really enjoy this process because it makes, if I use a manual focusing lens, I also don't want to check focus peaking all the time because it's a little bit distracting and you have to turn it off to see your photo clearly. So I like to have no focus peaking and then just use my custom function button here to zoom in. So yeah. Okay, now that I showed you how I customize 2 of my function buttons, or actually 3 because swiping up is ISO, let me show you how I set up the rest. So when I swipe from left to right, it brings up my white balance. When I swipe down, it brings up the Q menu. When I swipe left, it brings up my internal or external mic level adjustment settings. So here's how I set up my menu for photos. And as you can see, there isn't much, but number 1 is shutter type. I often switch between mechanical and electronical shutter. I really like the shutter sound of the X-E4, but sometimes it's a little bit too loud. And then I have face detection settings because sometimes I like to turn it off. And on the bottom, I can change my focus peaking highlight color because I mostly use white, but sometimes I like to use red. And I don't switch film simulations that much. I have a color one and a black and white one that I switch between via the Q menu. I guess now is a good time to talk about film simulations, and I only really use 2 of them. For color, I like to use Provia because it gives me the closest to real life, and I tried many of these Fujifilm recipes that you can find online, and they are fun and I enjoyed them, but I always come back to Provia, and I used to really like classic chrome with +3 saturation, but now I'm all Provia because Provia works really well for when you want to capture light, like the color of light. I think it works best with Provia. So here are my settings for color. I don't use any grain effect, also no color chrome effect or color chrome FX blue. To be real honest, I'm not quite sure what they're doing. I need to experiment more, but to me they don't do anything. I set dynamic range to auto, derange priority is off. Tone curve I have set to +0.5 highlights and 0 shadows. I know it's quite boring, but I like to keep it flat and low contrast. Color is 0, sharpness -1, and high ISO noise reduction -4, and clarity 0. And then the second film simulation I use a lot is Acros Standard. And for that I also don't use any grain effect, no color chrome effect, no color chrome FX blue. Dynamic range is on auto again, derange priority off. Tone curve is +0.5 highlights and +1.5 shadows. Sharpness -1, high ISO noise reduction -4, and no clarity. So here's how I use the X-E4 for street photography and casual snap shooting. So I have my aperture ring set to auto. I changed the shutter speed manually. I have ISO set to auto and the max is 6400. And then I use the single AF point in the middle and I focus and I recompose. And I also have face detection on sometimes when I take photos of people. And then I don't use the EVF that much because the EVF is okay. It's actually usable. I don't think it's a bad viewfinder. It's just that it is a little bit hard to see sometimes because the eye cup is not really that big. So there is a lot of light coming in from the side and it's not as easy to look through the viewfinder as on my X-H1. So I tend to use the screen because the screen is super sharp, and also I really like being able to shoot from the hip, low angle. So I usually have my camera in my hands like that. I'm often using my thumb to take a photo. And yeah, this is very comfortable. But whenever I use manual lenses, I prefer to use the viewfinder. I turned my touch screen off because I don't want to take photos by touching the screen or changing the focus point. I also don't use any burst mode because the X-E4 is actually very fast in single shot mode. So for me, this is super fast. I don't really need to use burst mode. The problem also is that the buffer fills up very quickly when you shoot in burst. And for me, this is fast enough. Man, the sun is really hitting my face hard. I hope it's not too overexposed, but let's continue. So the X-E4 has a little sports finder mode, which is kind of cool because it brings up frame lines that, remind me of a rangefinder. And what it actually is it helps you anticipate someone getting into your frame, but it also crops in a little bit. So when you take a photo, it saves the area that is framed. And to me, it feels like when I shoot the 23 f2, for example, it actually gives me exactly the field of view of this lens here, the 27, which is like a 40 on full frame. I don't know if you can reverse it when you import your RAW files, because at the moment of this recording, there's no support on Lightroom and Photoshop to open the X-E4 RAW files. But it is kind of cool. I don't use it really that much, but I can see how this can come in handy when shooting portraits, for example. I know that most people don't really see the X-E4 as a video camera, but for me it actually is a very good B camera next to my X-H1, because it basically has the same video features, the same look, the same video quality. And if you want to see a video I shot on the X-E4, it should be on my channel. I will link it up here, a little vlog I did, where I also go into detail how I set up my X-E4 for video. So check that out. But I will talk a little bit about my video settings. So the X-E4 has no in-body image stabilization. So that means when you shoot video, you really should use a stabilized lens. And I recommend using the kit lens, the 18-55. The AF and AF tracking works very well using face detection. It really does nail focusing all the time and keeps focusing, which is important. So let me show you how I set up my menu for video. So I have MF Assist peak at the top. I have my AFC custom settings below that. In case you want to know them, it's +1 tracking sensitivity and AF speed is -2. I have my face detection settings here, movie mode. For my YouTube videos, I usually shoot in DCI 4K, 24 frames per second and 100 megabits per second. If you want to know more about my video settings and how I customize my film simulation profile and all of that stuff and what microphones I'm using, check out the vlog I mentioned earlier, because that is where I go more into detail about my video settings. Okay, so that was another very long video, but I hope this was useful to you and you got some inspiration out of it. If so, then please reward my hard work by putting 3 grams more weight on your finger to press the like button. And if you're new to this channel, I do mostly street photography content. I share my travels and I feature interesting photographers that I find inspiring. So if you're into that, consider subscribing to the channel. We also have a Discord server with almost 2,000 members right now, where you can find like-minded people and talk about gear or show your work, get feedback. There will be an invite link in the video description. You can also become a channel member and get access to bonus content, longer versions of my public videos, monthly updates, and you also get access to all the replays of past live streams. Whatever you choose to do, it greatly supports my channel, so thank you everyone who's already doing that. You can also find me on Instagram. No, okay, I think I'm done with self-promoting, so stop. Thank you all for watching, happy shooting, and I'll see you next time.